Hi everyone, this is Lindsay Adreon and I'm here today to share with you a tutorial on spotlight stamping. For this technique you will need a clear stamp that's good for coloring, dark cardstock and white cardstock, a stamp positioner, a coloring medium of your choice, Versamark ink, black ink, white embossing powder, some adhesive, and also your heat tool. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and use my stamp positioner now. And I'm using the Misty. You can use whatever stamp positioner you may have. And I've placed in a piece of watercolor cardstock. Again, you want to use whatever cardstock corresponds with your coloring medium. And this measures 2.5 inches across by 5.5 inches tall. I'm going to go ahead and stamp this candle image. It is from the 2 Paper Divas stamp set, Make a Wish. And I am using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. Now since I'm watercoloring, I want to have a little well for myself to kind of contain my watercolors. So I'm going to go ahead and heat emboss these images that I'm stamping. You don't have to do this at this point. I'm just doing it because it's going to help me with my coloring later on. So I'm using Ranger Superfine Detail Clear Embossing Powder. I just sprinkled that on and I'm going to go ahead and heat set that. Now at this point, I went ahead and switched over to an acrylic block just to be able to fill in this cardstock a little bit quicker. I can stamp a whole lot of these candles at once and come in and heat set the entire thing at once also. What you want to make sure of though is that you leave quite a few of these images that you're stamping hanging over the edge because you want to be able to come in and finish them on your black cardstock. So you want to make sure that you've got quite a few hanging off the edge. And so you just go ahead and finish stamping this entire panel in. Once I go ahead and finish stamping this panel in, I am going to heat emboss this entire panel. Again, I'm using Ranger Superfine Detail in Clear. And another thing that's really going to help you with this technique is to just use a coffee filter and a little spoon. I'm just using a disposable baby spoon. And this just helps with the timing of everything so you don't have to clean up in between each embossing and you're not worried about stray powders flying all over your desk and things like that. So it just helps speed things along. Now that I've got that coated, I'll go ahead and come in and heat set this entire panel at one time, and I'm just using my tweezers to hang on to this so I don't burn my fingers. So once my powder is nice and melted, I'm going to go ahead and bring back in my stamp positioner. I went ahead and placed in my dark cardstock. I'm using black here, but you can use whatever color of dark cardstock you want to. And mine measures 4 1/4 by 5.5, the entire size of an A2 card base. Now again, you don't have to make it this large, you just want it larger than your white panel that you've already stamped on. So I went ahead and placed that in, and I placed my white panel where I want it to end up on my card, because once I stamp down, I'm not going to be able to move my white panel from the position I had it in the first time. So I've lined up my stamped from one of the stamped image that was overhanging off the white panel, and these are clear stamps so they're very easy to see through and line up just right. I went ahead and picked that up with my Misty lid, inked it up with some Versamark ink, and I'm just going to stamp that down onto the black paper. Now I'm going to bring back in the coffee filter and I will just sprinkle on some white embossing powder and heat set this. Now you don't have to use white embossing powder, you can use any color of embossing powder. You can use 3 different colors of embossing powder if you want to. It's up to you at this point really how you want to go about making these images two-toned. So I'm going to go ahead and heat set this, and you want to make sure that your powder is nice and melted because you're going to come back in with this white panel on top of this quite a few times, so you don't want to mess up any of your embossing that you've already done. So I made sure that was nice and heated there so it was all melted, and then you can see as I place my white panel back over that stamped image that overhangs just looks like it's completed on the black piece of cardstock, so it looks like 2 tone stamped images. So I'll go ahead and I will line this white piece back up with my stamped image, and the nice thing about the Misty is I can bump that white piece of cardstock up against the bottom so I know that it's nice and straight on there. Now I want to make sure that I have a point on the left and also a point on the right, so when I come in with the rest of my stamps, I know that these are nice and straight and my white panel is nice and straight. So I need a reference point on the right side, so I'm going to go ahead and line up my stamp on the right hand side with one of the images that overhangs. And sorry you could see my messy hair there, but it was a messy bun kind of day and it got in the way as I looked over to make sure my stamp was nice and lined up there. And then I can just remove my white panel. And again, I'm just going to ink this up with Versamark ink. I will come back in with the white embossing powder and I will heat emboss this. And that is really what you want to keep doing, and keep repeating those steps until all of the stamped images that look like they're hanging off the white panel are completed onto the black cardstock. So I'll just continue to repeat these steps until it's all nice and filled in on the black cardstock. Just remember to keep your images really nice and lined up with your white panel, because even if you're off on just a few, it's going to throw off your entire panel. So just take your time and really make sure things are lined up. So I'll just finish heat embossing that one, and then after you're completed with the ones that hang off the sides of the white cardstock, you want to come back in and fill in the rest of the black cardstock with the scattering of your stamped images, and then you can heat emboss those also. Now you can choose to color in your images any way you want to. Just make sure that you use the right cardstock and black ink for your coloring medium of choice. I went ahead and just did some very loose watercoloring, and I just used 4 different colors of distress ink: peacock feathers, spice marmalade, mowed lawn, and just a bit of mustard seed for the flames. Now I always think about my sentiment last, but I didn't want to take anything away from my stamp panels that I had spent so much time on, so I decided to make a file folder card that could just hang out from the edge and display my sentiment but not distract too much from my stamp panels. So I measured that out and it was 2.5 inches long. So I'm coming in with my ruler and I am just making 2 tick marks to measure out 2.5 inches, and that's how long I need my file folder. And then I also know that I need about 1/2 inch deep to be able to accommodate the width of my sentiment also. So I'm just making a tick mark for that also. Then I can put this green cardstock into my paper trimmer, and I can just use the ruler on my paper trimmer to come into each of those tick marks so I don't cut too far in. So I'm just going to start out with this one and bring it in just until I hit that pencil line, and then I can go ahead and bring my trimmer down to the other side and bring it in just very, very little. I believe I only came in about 1/4 inch on this side. So I'll just gently push that up. And then I didn't want to risk cutting this with my trimmer, so I just brought in some fine detail scissors, and I'm just going to trim these off at an angle. You don't want them straight, because if you look at a file folder, they are angled. And once I get those angled out, I'm just going to use my scissors again to round these corners. I tried to use a paper corner rounder, however it would not fit into these narrow little openings that I had to work with, so I used my scissors and made it as even as possible. I came in with that Make-A-Wish stamp set. I stamped it with Versamark ink and applied some white embossing powder and heat set it onto that green cardstock. I also used my heat gun just to make sure that my panel was nice and dry before I applied it to my card. Now I just put some double-sided adhesive onto that file folder tab that I made, and I'm just going to line that up with my white watercolored panel. Once I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and use the same double-sided adhesive on the piece of the black cardstock, and I will just peel the backing off, and I will put that on top of an A2 side folding card base. Now my black panel ended up being just a little bit short, so I do have a little hint of white peeking out on the left hand side, and I'm also going to bring in my scissors just to trim up any little pieces of white that are sticking out. When I'm done with that, I will go ahead and remove the backing from the adhesive on the back of the fun foam that I put on my watercolor panel. And then I will go ahead and place this right on top of the black cardstock, making sure that it's nice and lined up. And then it looks as if I have a completely stamped image that are two different tones. One is black and white and the other one is fully colored. I hope you all enjoyed this tutorial, and I can't wait to see what fun ways you come up with to use this technique on a card of your own. Thanks so much for watching.